good evening, everybody, wherever you may be, either in front of your computers, on site in Trieste, where we would all have loved to be at this moment in time, but couldn't, as you know, due to circumstances. You may be in front of your smartphones or in front of a terminal somewhere. I want to again give you a very warm welcome and introduce you to our session tonight, which is about digital skills for the industry of the future. And industry here is meant quite broadly. Manufacturing industry is what we typically associate with industry, but there are other industries, the finance industry, the services industry, and others. And digital skills matter no matter where you go. There's going to be a touch point to digital technologies and digital skills essentially everywhere these days. We'll dive into these points in more detail, but before I do that, let me introduce to you my co-panelists. I'm grateful that they were joining me tonight for something that's hopefully going to be for you an inspiring and interesting discussion around this topic. And let me start with the two ladies on the panel. First, Hanna Milanov. Hanna is professor at the Technical University in Munich, School of Management, and she is also responsible at this moment in time for the university's academic program for the Executive MBA in Innovation and Business Creation, which these days is probably much more about digital and digital technologies than it was, say, 10, 15, or 20 years ago. The second lady on the panel, a warm welcome to Laura Montagna. Laura is Director of New Technologies at SKF Group, a Swedish company that is a manufacturer of durable goods, known to many of you for their components in the automotive industry, but also in the aviation industry. And I've come to know Laura many years ago when she was director of SKF's R&D center in the Netherlands. Now to the two gentlemen on the panel. First, I welcome Jan Gulliksen. Jan is actually also from, like SKF, there's a Swedish connection here, although it turns out that Jan is not a Swede by originally, but he has spent most of his career, of course, in Sweden. He is Vice President for Digitalization at KTH in the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm. And he is at the same time a professor at that university, a professor of human-computer interaction. Quite obviously, that relates to digital skills. And then the fourth person on the panel, a warm welcome to my friend for many years, Ziad Barouni, who we had time together at the campus of the Technical University many years ago and stayed in contact ever since. Ziad is the co-founder and CEO of Munich-based technology company Motius, which is in a sense an R&D services provider to large multinationals in the domain of, let me describe it, fast-moving digital technologies. It's not only about programming, it's also about hardware components. And that team serves a large number of companies that try to enter that domain, but recognize it requires skills and competencies that some of these large companies may not have in-house. With that introduction, let me move over to the content of our session and say, before we actually talk about digital skills, I think we cannot talk about that unless we have set the stage for what that digital transformation means that everybody is talking about. Be it in industry, be it in business models, be it anywhere, digital transformation is something that seems to have reached all corners in the sense of economic life. But what, in the end, is it, digital transformation? And that matters, of course, in the context of what do I need to have in terms of skills to be ready for the challenges and the opportunities that the digital transformation brings with us. I'll start out here with Laura from the industry and ask her, when you speak about digital transformation, Laura, in your company, SKF, what does it mean? What is your understanding of digital transformation?
Thank you, Carlos. I would say, as an industry, we have been in the last years through many changes of processes. You always have to change to be competitive, but nothing is comparable to the change driven by digital. And why so? Because this is completely integrated between what you do in manufacturing and what you do at your customers. And this is a uniqueness that was not possible before. And what does it mean? Let me start with the customer first, because we have to see where the opportunities are at the customers. Digital technologies allows us to have, let me say, the customer application at your PC on alive. I mean, at the very moment they happen, to see that they happen. This is possible with hardware. it possible with software. There is plenty of that. But what is the very problem is how to interpret those data at the best to take decision. The very point is how to select the decision. So the digital transformation for us is the possibility to take the best possible decision related to a customer machine or other equipment with the knowledge that we have. So it is a full integration of the knowledge that comes from the many years of course, of leading the market and the technology, and what happens, in fact, in real time. This is a unique possibilities, but it's not a given. Why is not a given? Because the very point to make it happen here are the skills in-house and the skills at the customer. And they may not be there like we dream to be. They may be an ambition, but they not be ready day one. So the very transformation at the end is not about which hardware you apply, which cloud you choose. It's about which skills you invest on at your place, at your customer, and where is, let's say, what comes first and what you can still wait, because you cannot have all the skills now, from the beginning. So the very transformation is there, is in the interaction between the engineers of the two sides, between the machine and the human, and between, let's say, the platform that you have, the support and the decision making that goes with the knowledge. Did I get it clear?
Yeah. Let me follow up here with one question maybe at this point. The products of SKF traditionally have been, they have differentiated themselves from competitors' products by excellence in manufacturing, right? Fine machining and everything designed exactly right for purpose. But those products were not digital. The production may have involved digital technologies, but in the hands of the customer, it is a piece of hardware, a well-designed, well-honed one. Is that changing for SKF? So you say like our products become also digital.
Of course, this is the very point. The product itself is maybe the same, but the product speaks because it is connected to sensors, is connected to data, let's say, detection. And consequently, is not the product itself, the single piece that speaks, is the machine where the product is in fact located. So the digital transformation is already at the customer. They used to, let's say, to replace a component based on historical or statistical data. They will replace the component based on what the, let's say, the machine will tell us in a place where the data are processed, let's say, on live. So this will be the change. We move from a component-based, let's say, business model to an uptime-based, a time-of-use-based business model.
Thank you. But that's maybe a segue for me to move over to Hannah, the change in business models that comes with digital. I think, Hannah, in the programs that you're running at the university with these industry executives that go for an MBA, you probably have, in a sense, people from across all industries and all functions in the room. And when they come in and you talk about digital, you probably recognize, or you may recognize, that they have all a slightly different angle to it. What is the, if I may say so, the commonality in your teaching, in your work with these executives? What does everybody has as a common understanding, and where do you think things start diverging? Because what Laura described is something pretty typical for the durable goods industry. My product becomes more digital by, it's able to talk to me by the data it generates. But that's very different in banking, or very different in the insurance industry or somewhere else. Give us an idea from your experience about talking about digital transformation, what that means when you talk to the groups in your classes.
I'd be glad to. So I think what's interesting, there's so many connecting points to what Laura was talking about in terms of how that implies what we should be doing in education. So just as a food for thought for later, whether it's about skills into the different decision-making issues that she was talking about in terms of priorities, where to invest, the communication across the domains in the company, it's not silos thinking anymore. So there's a lot to bridge against. But Carlos, directly to your question, I think what's in common to all the students or executives that we see is twofold. On one hand, there's the common fear of missing out on all the things that are happening and changing and being sort of left behind the curve, paired with a sense of opportunity, that there's a lot going on and you know, hunger for doing something interesting. What, as you say, differs a lot between them is the context they're coming from. So we have everything from medical doctors, where, you know, the level of digitalization, you talk about digitalization, we have startups saying we can't sell our product because there's no internet in hospitals, right? So on one hand, the infrastructure they have available in their settings, on the other hand, the regulatory framework that they have to be facing. So when it comes to, for example, medical or pharma, etc., you have very different chains around what you're able to do and how fast you're able to do it, as opposed to, for example, insurance and banking, where things can be moving much quicker in many ways. So in that sense, it's interesting to have these conversations then on how to approach the opportunities and the fears and how fast you're able to move in getting ahead.
Let me ask you somewhat bluntly, do you bump into people who say like, that's a fad? In my industry, that doesn't matter. The metrics of quality are the same that they were in the past, and it's a lot of, I would say, talk and for us little relevance. Or has that disappeared? Because I recall in the early days that people said, yeah, that's about gaming and other things, but it's not for us. Do you still see that, or has that completely changed?
Well, I have a slightly biased audience in terms of being, you know, they pay money to be in an MBA on entrepreneurship and innovation. So they'd be silly to say things like that, probably. But I have come across it in different other EMBAs or sometimes across our guest speakers. But less and less so, I would say.
Yeah,
I think what people are tired a little bit is the buzzword of digital transformation. It's such a big thing that's sitting on everybody's head. I think people much more prefer to talk specific challenges, whether it's about what digitalization means for how we organize work and the future of work, whether it's about operational excellence, whether it's a communication issue. So this is where discussions get deeper. The big buzzword of digital transformation, I think, is something that's starting to sort of sit as a big cloud on our heads.
That makes sense. We'll get to that later on too. I agree. I mean, it's sometimes not very helpful if it's all summarized under one headline or one umbrella, and then it looks so different from domain to domain. From academia back to the private sector and on to you, Seat. I mean, your company and you yourself, of course, are digital, if I may say so, but the companies you work with are not. They are eager to learn more, but at the same time, they are, and as I laid it out with Laura, their pride is in having been the best and brightest in manufacturing or in product design or in marketing or whatever. Give us an idea of the challenges you face in that context, digital transformation, when you work with companies. What goes well, and where do you recognize maybe not everybody has understood what it means?
I think the main thing is digitization for digitization's sake doesn't work anymore. So, I mean, 3 or 4 years ago, everybody was doing it just for the sake of digitization. Now, the hard questions are being asked, which are, what is the business case of this? As Hannah said, are we doing it to organize ourselves internally in a different manner, which is, in my opinion, the only thing you could do in the sense of digitization for digitization's sake. You have to become more digital internally to attract the new graduates coming out of universities to be more compatible with them. But apart from that, the hard questions are being asked now. What exactly are we doing with this? AI is a very good example of this. Okay, we have a lot of data come in. Let's build this very fancy, nice AI product. Okay, we build a small prototype, and then to move it to something that really has an impact, you have to answer the question of business. What does this exactly bring? And I think, from my perspective at least now, that is a major challenge, because there are companies like us who could build the best AI product for you out there. We could do that. It's technically available on the market with companies like us. But for you as a specialized niche company to decide what exactly am I going to do with this AI project? How does it fit in my strategy? What is the business case for it? That is an issue. I'll give you a very small example, a very small but telling example. A lot of companies who used to work in hardware, their controlling departments used to have, so if you have an idea from the R&D department, you go and you have to fill in a business case. The template of the business case did not have a definition of what a user is. It had a definition of a sold hardware device. And then they were like, okay, we are going to build an ecosystem. Everybody says ecosystem nowadays, of course. And in ecosystem, you don't only have hardware, you have users. And users have a value, a certain value to acquire, a certain value to convert, and that kind of thing. But that know-how is not technical know-how, that is business know-how. And companies like, let's say, LinkedIn or Facebook, and I'm not saying Silicon Valley companies are, I'm not one of those people, but they have a very precise definition of what is the value of a user, and they could build it in the templates. The German companies, the European companies who are shifting from purely hardware-based models to digital-based models, which implicitly means you have a user, struggle to quantify the business case for it. Not only strategically, but only quantify it from the controlling perspective. So those are but what that translates into, it translates into less budgets. So you'd have a big budget for a company sitting at quote unquote digitization, but that doesn't translate into anything because there is no business case behind it. And there's no business case behind it because you cannot quantify it. So those are the challenges we are facing. And what happens in those cases are two kind of things. Either you have a company with a lot of money and just say, let's just do all of that stuff. That happens at the early cycle of a certain technology. That happened with blockchain last year, happened with AI 5 years ago. And we are the guys who jumped on the train really, really early. But then the next stage of it is where a lot of those initiatives die because they're not quantifiable. So to summarize my opinion, the digital skills themselves, they're very important to build within a company, but they're buyable right now. You have companies to do it. The issue where companies cannot help you with is to quantify the business case for yourself.
So here, the point, I mean, in simplified terms, often what people say is you approach them with a new idea and say like, this is going to be big for you. And they say, show me the money. Right? And that's the business case you're talking about, right? So show me the business case. I think a few years ago, if I recall that correctly, it was a bit like you couldn't afford to miss the train. Right? So it was a little easier to get people into investing because they were sort of scared that they didn't know where the money was, but they knew that if they were slower, they thought they would be left behind. Someone else would figure it out. That hasn't happened to the extent, I think, that many companies were fearing. So they are a little more sober today, I guess. But if they can't make the business case internally, who can make it for them?
Maybe a first comment first about fear of missing out. Fear of missing out is maybe the first 100,000 euros of the budget, right? You can afford it. Let's do a POC and let's see, that is the first 100,000. But moving that POC into a production system is where the big money comes in. And that is where people start choking. And to your question, who can do it for them? This is now the thing happening in consultancy markets. So digital consultancies tend to be relatively shallow when it comes to this question because it has to be technical driven to an extent. Companies like us, R&D companies, tend to be purely technical driven. So you need a combination of probably completely technical driven approaches, which is ours, which is basically the answer to the question, what technology is out there that changes your strategy? And then you have strategy consultants that tell you what should be your strategy, but I don't think there's a way around you as a company figuring out what is valuable for me and how much am I willing to invest there. That's a taste question.
Very good, thank you. Let me move over to Jan now. And Jan, you're not only working as a digital transformation guide, a shepherd in a sense for your own university, but you're also working with governments, the Swedish government on the European level. And I'm sure that is, digital transformation is on the agenda day and night. What is for you the bigger picture of digital transformation? And maybe also the second question is, where do you think people get it wrong, misunderstand what it means? What's your take?
So interestingly enough, the choice of words here was digital transformation, and then my fellow speakers here started talking about digitalization or digitization, and to me there's a clear distinction between the words that I'd like to focus on, because digitization is typically, I would give you an example, when my university decides that their forms that you need to fill in would be put online as a PDF so that I could print it, fill it in by hand, scan it, and then email it back to them. So it's simply just taking whatever was there beforehand and put it online, more or less. And that's sort of a very old-fashioned view of what is happening, but that's still many people think about when they think about digitalization. So therefore, rather than talking about digitization, I want to talk about digitalization, which then is when you can do completely new things and do things in completely new ways with the help of technology. So, for example, if you look upon like Airbnb digitalizing the ways that the hotel business is working, or Uber or other similar things that are happening in that way. Or if I look upon the theme of this session, which is digital skills, it's interestingly enough now to see that universities are actually doing development of their own thing in the very same way that we've done over the last 1,000 years, I would say. We're still lecturing in the same way we did 1,000 years ago, gathering people in big rooms, speaking in one-way communication to them. But when we then try to work with digitalizing what this is, interestingly enough, if I'm just can share a story that happened to me about a year or a year and a half ago. There was one of my directors of the undergraduate studies that came and said, Jan, we have a problem with your education because the students have stopped coming, and but I've solved the problem, he said. I've now decided that from now on, your lectures will be mandatory to attend. And I said, well, I don't think really that's a good way to solve this. So let me go around and check with my students what transformation they're into in this. And the first student I talked to was a student that had various disabilities, cognitive disabilities. So he'd asked to film my lecture with his mobile phone. And I went to him and asked him, how did this work? And he said, well, it's perfect because now I can watch your lecture in chunks of a few minutes and watch it over and over again so that I can really understand what this is about. So it's really perfect. And then I said, well, that doesn't really explain why students have stopped coming to my class. And then he said, well, you know, I actually shared your lecture also in a Facebook group of my fellow classmates here, so everybody could see it. Oh, you did, I said, interesting. And then I went on and interviewed some of the other students about this, and I got these amazing stories showing the innovation capabilities among students. There were one girl from Iran that had actually managed to find software to subtitle my lecture and translate it into Arabic. So she was looking upon my lecture with her entire family, discussing that afterwards. Oh, there was another student saying that I think you speak far too slowly. So I've found a much more efficient way. So I watch your lecture in double speed afterwards, and then I can learn twice as fast. So what do I mean with this story? Well, for me, digitalization is actually when you completely start changing the way that we educate and learn things in the future, simply because the digital technology allows us to do that. And the depressing thing herein is that who are the ones running this? Well, unfortunately, it's not the university professors to that extent that you would expect, but it's actually the students that are driving the change, that are coming up with new ways of attending lectures all over the world, and then coming to class to discuss what they've seen online and sort of challenge what other lecturers have said. And you start working with things in a completely different fashion. And that gives us an opportunity to share whatever we have to the worldwide audience, in a sense. So this is what digitalization means for me, this enormous transformation capabilities that the technology allows us to do these days.
Yeah, thank you, Jan. That's actually the way, while you are speaking, I thought interesting how you approach it in the university, because you kind of like learn as you go, right? Students using new tools and techniques, and booms, maybe there's something which we have overlooked, we've never tried. So that in a sense, that exploratory way, I think, is probably the right way to go about it. But I get back to what Siad said and then pass on to you, Laura. So Siad said the challenge today is the business model or the business case for it. The university does not have that worry, not so much at least with a business model, although it may well be that students say the university that delivers best is the one I would prefer over the others. But now the nice story of exploration and learning as you go, I move over to Laura and say, from your experience in industry, is industry maybe sometimes too focused on the business case and on the immediate return that digital offers, and may miss out on much greater opportunities that, however, want to be discovered? Or do you think you have a pretty good overview of what goes on and you're placing the bets already where there's certainty that that is the best way to go? I think it's the constant struggle we have with innovation in industry, isn't it? How do you see that?
Yes. First of all, I would like to say I really thank you the point of Ziad on the business case, because this is a nightmare indeed. And why so? Because I mean, let's call not maybe a business case in very hard terms, but also in terms of business opportunities. Let's call business opportunities. Don't necessarily put a figure, hard figure next to it, but still to match the digital technologies or enablers, let's say, that are available with the real business, and to make a nice story of opportunities to the high management is still not so easy. And there is not about taking the consultant A or a consultant B. It's about, let's say, I would say the buy-in across different functions of the organization. So that means, from sales to finance, via manufacturing. So the business case, I agree, it's a bit of an issue. But why so? Because at the end is about the understanding of what digital means by also, let's say, the senior level, that is not coming from an education where it has, let's say, is so fresh in terms of digital, and maybe some skepticism as well. So let me say that the experience says that we cannot choose not to, let's say, adopt what we can call digitalization, but the very point is how to select. And here is where I see the need of defining a bit in a company what we can define a digital maturity. So we should have, a type of internal KPI that define the maturity. And the maturity is both the knowledge, and in order to close the gap between that may acquire new knowledge. I mean, it's a matter of time that we have enough, let's say, availability of new graduated. It was maybe a scarcity years ago. This scarcity may reduce in the time. But the very point is about how this is embedded into, let's say, the company business. And so the digital maturity of a company is not only about what we can buy, but is also how we can grow in knowledge. So I think it's very important for a company to define a type of own journey of digital maturity, and where the business case, in fact, is about growing that digital maturity. And so, let me say, spend the money to grow the maturity towards the customer needs and for internal processes.
Thank you. Let me jump over again to Hannah and the executive MBA student, and of course, all the others that you work with, the entrepreneurs and so on. There is, in my experience, always a bit of a risk in large companies that whatever comes along and that's new, you try to, some people call it, cram it into your existing way of doing business, into your product, or the way, or into your sales channels, or into the way how you make money, or whatever it is. When it comes to new digital innovation, do you think that when you talk to the practitioners in your circles, there is an understanding that they have to step out of that comfort zone and look at their business from the outside, in a sense? How would I, let me phrase it like that, how would I build my business if I were to start from scratch with everything digital at my fingertips available? I would probably build a different company. But the reality is I'm sitting in a company that has grown over 100 years in some cases, or 200 even, right? It's very old companies. Now, what can I change, right? Am I trapped? Can I really leave the trodden path? Can I do that? That conflict, I think, is one that pushes many companies around a little bit. Share with us your experiences with that.
So I think you mentioned businesses, but obviously what Jan mentioned is also universities, right? Many of us are very set in our ways, and it takes a good crisis, and never waste a good crisis not to change things around a little bit. And I think what Jan mentioned was also very telling. He said, you know, it's unfortunately not the professors driving the innovation. And I would question the unfortunate part, because what we also teach our executives and what we discuss inevitably is what is the source of innovation. And I think digital allows you to approach that innovation not in a way that you have to build it internally, but that you observe your users and grasp those opportunities and bring them into the company, right? So why not have students innovate for us? It's excellent. You don't have to pay the professor to think things through. You just talk to a student and you bring it on board. So in that sense, I think where some of this tension comes from is not necessarily on the digital skill front, it's on the human part. And what we're finding a lot is that just like Ziad mentioned, you know, companies have to really rethink what is their business case. What we're seeing is that company leaders have to question what is their role in guiding these companies towards transformation. So on one hand, you have the concept of humility and saying, hey, I don't know. I don't know what's the answer. Now, not many leaders were educated to say that in advancing their careers, and to have that kind of humility and to build a team and find the collaborators to allow you to learn faster is something that we're finding a lot of leaders grapple with and try to find their own dignity and confidence in saying something of a kind. It's difficult, obviously. Similarly, collaborating with startups. So startups which were taken with sort of a grain of salt, which one will die tomorrow, and maybe with some laughter, are now taken much more seriously by companies, and finding good collaborative modes with startups in staying ahead of the innovation curve is another collaborative skill that we're talking through in challenging that. And then finally, I would say empathy. Because I mentioned fear initially. Obviously, I think we're seeing in a lot of companies, and there's a lot of research looking at how employees are reacting to this big talk of digital transformation and robots taking their jobs and AI putting them out of a job, etc. So to build this kind of empathy and building resilience within these employees and knowing how to take them forward and keep the best employees on board rather than cut jobs and have the best ones leave you, are some of the things that people are working on. So it's not just about digital skills, but going back to basics.
Yeah, it's going back to basics. We'll come to that point later, because I think
okay.
you may make the case for those basic skills are digital skills in a sense, since without those, we're not going to progress, right? And just for the audience, if you're thinking we're still talking about digital transformation, I think most of the discussion here revolves around the ability to deal with new opportunities that digital provides and the roadblocks to it. And Anna, you mentioned the seasoned executives, or also you said that, Laura, they were brought up in different times and certainly have been, I would say, good leaders in the right context. They haven't had the exposure to it. They have no gut feel for it. They are lacking the firsthand experience that a younger generation brings into the companies. And so we'll talk about a little bit later, how can we make sure that digital skills is well defined across all ranks of a company. What a top-notch CEO needs to know is different from what a technical expert on the shop floor needs to know, but digital is for both important regardless. Before we go there, however, I would like to get back to Ziad again. And since Anna, you said the startups and that have they were eager to be at the forefront, right, to be the firsts. Ziad, your company is working with a lot of companies who are very well established in their industries, but isn't it kind of like puzzling that one has the impression they are playing catch up primarily? They see someone else doing something successfully and say, oops, we can't afford to fall behind. But they don't seem to have an ambition to be genuinely the ones who drive the industry into a different direction. It may be overly harsh, but if I look at the automotive sector, that is my impression. Unless someone comes along, a disruptor, and hits the other companies left and right, they just sit still and don't do much. Maybe overly harsh, but what's your response to it? Trying to be the agent of change versus not trying to lose and catching up fast with all your might and all your resources you have.
Well, difficult to answer. I mean, my first intuition was to say, well, it's a European problem because the American companies we work with tend to be a bit different. But then I thought, no, that's not actually true. The only companies that tend to be different are companies who historically were different, like a Google or a Microsoft and so on. But even the other American companies we work with, they're similar. I think the challenge when it comes to tech, and I'm speaking only from a purely tech perspective now, is the set of technologies that could mean something for you as a company is huge now. Didn't used to be this big. 10 years ago, who would have thought that or the automobile industry would be so interested in such a niche applied mathematics technology like AI? AI is a niche applied mathematics technology that exists since the 80s. So if you are working in tech scouting in one of those companies, your solution space is at its maximum, historically speaking now, because every tech could mean something for you. What that meant is they're realizing they cannot keep up with everything that happens in that huge solution space. That's why companies like us exist. Our main value proposition is we're very good with new technologies. We could say, hey, this is what this means for you. But what that also means, because it's so big, once you see something catching a bit of momentum in that solution space, they jump on it. Blockchain was a great example last year. Do we have a mass scale application for blockchain today? In my opinion, we still don't. And when it happened last year and the year before, everybody had flashbacks of AI that they didn't jump on it, and everybody jumped on it. And funnily speaking, or ironically speaking, most of the blockchain stuff we did were co-financed by marketing departments in our client. That shows you what the thinking is. The thinking is, okay, we need this as a recruitment strategy sometimes, because don't forget those companies are struggling to acquire the right talents for them. But also the solution space of what tech could mean for them is huge. So they see something rolling out, some technology gets hyped up, and then they jump on it. But that is only the tip of the iceberg. A lot of those companies you work with are very serious companies. So they may be, compared to certain standards, a bit slow, but the jury is still out on what is really slow and what is fast and what is better of the both. We still don't know. We see in the Mittelstand in Germany now, a lot of smaller companies are doing a great job in monetizing the data they have. Way better than bigger companies in America that jumped on the train 2 years ago and spent a few $100,000 on it, and then the POCs are laying around. So the summary of my answer is, not being a trendsetter is not necessarily a bad thing, because you need to figure out why am I doing blockchain as a car company? And if you co-finance it from a marketing department, that's already the answer. So to attract talent, fair enough. But maybe you should wait a little bit to see what exactly is the potential of the technology and where the business case gets clearer and so on. As long as you have a little bit of budget to play around. And I think a lot of companies do, even smaller companies in Europe.
You mentioned attracting talent, which brings us back to the academic sector, to universities, and to the skills question at its core. And that is, Jan, if I may ask you, I don't know if there's consensus across the faculties at your university. Probably not. But sort of, if you had it your way, what would you want every graduate from the university? And now I'm generous and say, I'm not only talking about computer science and engineering and natural sciences. I'm talking about everybody. What would you like them to take away from their graduate studies or undergraduate studies to be at least prepared to the required level, so that they can handle the demands and the challenges that they will face in the workplace? Is that something that the university tries to codify or structure and say, like, that's the must-haves in the curriculums? Or is it pretty much left to every individual faculty and discipline?
I think that the single most important thing you get out of a university education is that you learn to learn. So you learn to very quickly be able to grasp a very complex field and put the pieces together and be able to learn new things. I think that we've struggled a bit in the past on developing, particularly the tech educations, where they've tended to become longer and longer. I did an engineering degree 25, 30 years ago, and then it was 4 years long. And now they're talking about it to become 6 years long to fit in all of these new technologies that are needed. I think that's completely wrong. I think we should go the other way and making the educations shorter, but realize that education is about lifelong learning, that you probably, my prediction is that all people in the future that are working, and particularly within domains bordering to technology, need to spend 10 to 20% of their working time educating themselves throughout their working life. So that is what we should be able to grasp. The other thing is that I recently did a survey for the Swedish government looking into advanced digital skills, which is something that the government has been pushing a lot because they see that there's really a lack of advanced digital skills in the society, and they want to find out how can we improve the situation. So I looked into that and tried to both do a survey and an interview study, understanding what do people define as advanced digital skills. And then eventually it turns out that what you now expect from a person that has advanced digital skills is that they should not only be specialized in a particular area, such as AI or machine learning or blockchain or something like that, but they should probably also have knowledge on an application domain like healthcare or finance or something like that, or industry. They should have great communication skills. They should be excellent speakers. They should have a good psychological ability to understand the users of the technology that they're developing. They should have a true sense of values and things like that. So we sort of, it seems like we want to recreate the Renaissance person here that needs to have all different types of skills. And do you really expect a few years at the university to be able to deliver this? I don't. I think that we actually need to reform the entire education system, starting with kindergarten and how we sort of emphasize different types of skills and particularly these practical skills that you can work with and how you apply that. Now, I am a professor of a truly multidisciplinary field. I've done both engineering, psychology, and design for my human-computer interaction professorship. But the single most important knowledge I've acquired that I use every day in my work is that I started out with drama. I wanted to be an actor and director. I wanted to sort of work with those kind of things. That's what I use every day as a teacher, as a researcher, as somebody that tries to convince people of the message that I'm bringing in. So the skills that are needed in the future are really different to what they are nowadays. And unfortunately, we have a system at the university where we actually reward and rank universities based on to what extent they build long and very specialized educations, and to what extent we actually award degrees. So we counted on how many degrees we award rather than what knowledge we're able to deliver to the students so that they can go out and become these excellent entrepreneurs or researchers or politicians or whatever role they should take in the future. So I think that there's really a need now to rethink the entire system, because you can't really blame the universities for not sort of taking on this role for the future. It's a complex system where industry play an important role in understanding that they need to fund their staff to get more education throughout their working life. The people themselves need to be able to educate themselves and understand that I need to continue to build my knowledge beyond the initial years I did at the university. Universities need to digitalize and change the way that they're delivering the education that they do. And the government really needs to stop sort of putting restrictions on the funding to the universities in such a way that we actually limit the education we're giving to sort of small, narrow programs to provide specialized skills in a certain area, rather than being more efficient and spreading the knowledge that we're able to spread much more widely using digitalization, for example.
Very good. Thank you, Jan. A few things tie back to points Hannah raised. And before I come to you, Laura, and ask you about sort of like what kind of skills would you like entrance into your company, new entrants to have, I need to check with Hannah a couple of things. The first one is, you said back to basics, and Jan said learning to learn. So that seems to be a common denominator here. He also said the relevance of an application domain, that we don't learn things in the abstract and then hope that we can just apply it wherever we move. You have that challenge in a business school, certainly, that students learn the basics of business in a generic fashion, but they may end up anywhere, in any industry. While mechanical engineers tend to end up with mechanical products in a sense. While in your case, it's much broader. What would you say is if you had it your way, what would you want those graduates to walk away with in terms of core understanding? And it could be both. It could be the master's programs that you're in, and it could also be, of course, the executive MBA programs.
Well, it's funny because as you were asking Jan the question, I was sort of jotting down my answers, and one of them was learning to learn, and emphasizing that, which sort of naturally comes paired with curiosity. I'm a mother of very young children, and to watch them interact with the world is fascinating because they take nothing for granted, right? Every paper can be something new to them, and in that sense, fostering that curiosity, fostering that open-mindedness, and that sort of transfers into entrepreneurial skills of asking yourself, what can I do with this? And to Ziad's point, what could be the business case for it? So I think fostering the curiosity and the entrepreneurship part is something that we as universities can do, not just in business schools, but in engineering and all other sciences. However, all of this to really be responsible for these people should come paired with, in my view, with some sort of personal work on self. Resilience is the modern word that we use a lot with that. In my interactions with talents, especially high potential talents, they are really struggling. They're struggling with this sense of opportunity, the number of opportunities, whether that's geographical choices, whether that's technology choices, whether that's startups to start. They're struggling with what their parents expect from them, which is typically not a startup and which is not understanding technology. They're struggling with what businesses expect from them, with the monetary implications of their choices. So I think all of these choices, all of this knowledge, all of this lifelong learning comes with incredible pressure. So finding ways to help these people build resilience and security in self and some sort of confidence is something we have to learn. And then to the point of you were making in terms of application and Ziad's points of making a business case of things, ongoing collaboration with businesses is critically important. This is something where TUM, I think, is better than many universities and something we pride ourselves in terms of collaboration with businesses and startups alike. But this is a bit of a challenge in terms of what Jan was saying, that we are not ranked on that often. We are ranked on the research we produce, and that doesn't necessarily, at least in business schools, come from interaction and sending students to companies. It comes from locking professors in a room and giving them time to be away from the students, which is, an internal struggle we have. So I think in that sense, knowing what the carrot is for the universities and maybe aligning it, this is a message also to policymakers, could be something to rethink. But just to reiterate, the message would be threefold. On one hand, lifelong learning, sense of curiosity paired with entrepreneurial skills, work on resilience, and personal strength and development, and early exposure to project-based learning and application, whether that's with startups or companies or governments, for that matter, that could be also useful.
Thank you for that list. I mean, I'm sure some of our audience is kind of like, not surprised, but kind of like, interesting. Those are quite fundamental things that don't have to do anything with programming or with data analytics or whatever. But the reality is digital, be it in the form of its transformation or expectations on the workforce, it has created a time and environment of uncertainty and change, and fast change continuously. While when in the past, people went to their jobs with a package of good knowledge and they sort of like it was a stable environment, they could settle in, they no longer can take things for granted for much longer than a short period of time. Their industry may be in turmoil at the next moment. And that makes it interesting that we get back to the, I would say, core fundamentals of being a someone who is better in control of his or her professional development and career, because things are just a lot less predictable. And it's much harder to be prepared once and forever. But you may be good for entry, but things will change and you have to have the ability. And all of that starts with the factors that you were mentioning. Let me jump over at this point to Laura, and then later on I come to you, Syed, in terms of your wish list. When people coming from the university and hopefully have learned to learn, which you have taken for granted in the past, that the good graduates would be able to keep on learning new stuff, which they have to once they go into the application. What are things today, Laura, that you think are important for them to have to be successful in the environment as it is evolving in SKF? Around, of course, tied to the question of digital.
Yes. I would say that there are a few skills that require the exposure to real cases, you know, the exposure to the real, let's say, what is the real world, the product, the production, and what do they need to, what we appreciate. What we appreciate very much is problem solving. I mean, typically you will take, like every other company, we will look for data scientists, for analytics, for IE expert. But you know, the fact that they have a tool, it doesn't mean the problem is solved on itself. So the problem solving and the possibility to speak with the expert, that maybe they don't have the expertise they have, but they have, let's say, the real world knowledge of the business itself. So problem solving, in my view, is very important. I would add agile problem solving. It doesn't take 1 year to solve the problem, right? You may go to kill the monsters in small pieces and to come to some small solutions and move ahead. So that, in my view, is, let's say, appreciated if this is available. Together with that, I would like to, in a way, reverse what Hannah was saying before about the importance of to be humble from the high level in the company. I think it's also true for the new student. Of course, they will, the new hire, they will, you know, feel a bit special because they have skills that all the others, you know, watch with open eyes. And to be also humble to learn from the others, because in my view, the very point is how to combine the very skilled one with the non-skilled or non-skilled in the same discipline. And here, like, you know, in the industry, we speak having training for our workforce, like upskilling, like reskilling, but the very risk is de-skilling. That means you don't know what to do with your employees because the transformation is so fast. So in that sense, I like to see some humble from the new hire to learning to give. You know, that means to communicate in a way that the others can contribute, and at the end we are a teamwork that can go to the same direction. So to be humble, to learn from others, and to give, you know, it's another element. And I would say, not last, I think it would be important from already at the university to have an environment. I don't want to say ecosystem because maybe a buzzword, but an environment where, in fact, let's say, the exposure to problems, it could be in a startup, could be in a competence center, could be university incubators. So the type of exposure that's called entrepreneurship really gives a boost. We have seen that the students that can go through that experience for 6 months or 1 year. Let's say they have a motivation when they enter an industry that makes a difference.
Very good. It's actually interesting. I thought we would end up in a discussion around what programming languages people have to master and what AI algorithms, deep neural networks or whatever would be most important. We end up with a very different set of skills here. And that's, I think it's encouraging on the one hand side, but it also, I think, shows that maybe there is a lack of it in practice, that in a stable environment, you get through with just doing your thing well, and you're doing it better every day, and you're going to be rewarded for being better at it day after day. While in an environment where things are less certain, you're going to be rewarded if you're able to kind of support the organization to a large extent. Actually say, like, being willing to give is something that probably an early stage employee would never have felt as an important thing for him or her in 20 years ago. Right? But how can you support the organization in an environment where there's inhomogeneity? Long-term employees with great technical skills in one domain, but a complete blank, if you will, in another, while you come in strong here, but have no clue about the technical depth that they do have. How do I tie them together? That's actually an interesting point, I think, and requires a strong qualification in a very different domain than technical expertise. Let me jump over then to Ziad. Because sort of what is on your wish list when people join Motius? What should they be good at, and where do they get it even?
Maybe to give some context to this, to the answer, maybe I should explain how Motius is structured. The whole idea of Motius is, the main thing, so just to start over, my answer would be number one should be practical experience in building things as a techie. And if it wasn't for practical experience, we wouldn't have founded Motius. I only came to Germany 12 years ago, I think, by now, and I had the luck to work as a student in a big car company, which is something that most other countries, especially the country I come from, it isn't possible for you as a student to work practically in the industry. And me and my friends working in the industry allowed us to come up with the idea of Motius. That's number one. Being able to work in the industry and gather experience. But going back to the structure of Motius to explain what we really focus on, Motius is a fluid structure. And the whole idea of Motius was big companies have a massive issues with new technologies. If we somehow build a company that has a fluid structure, fluid as in an inbuilt fluctuation in the company, we will keep up with new tech because the world out there also fluctuates. The inbuilt fluctuation is a pool we have. We have a pool of 900 people combined with a fixed team, which we call core. That pool of 900 people are relatively young people. The average age is 26. That changes every 2 to 3 years. People move to the core, and with that change, we stay close to new technology. They belong to us. It's not a crowd we send to other people. Now, those people come into us in the pool. We used to recruit them on academic profile. What did they study? What courses did they do? And that kind of thing. We realized very quickly. By the way, we have an algorithm that matches those people to projects we have. And we notice that the parameter of their academic background doesn't really matter in that matching. The main thing that matters is the practical experience they have. Our CTO, probably the best coder in all of the company, we have around 120 people. That CTO studied aeronautical engineering, didn't even study IT, but has been programming since he's, I think, 14, 13, something like that. So practical experience is number one. I think Germany is doing a very good job at this. So you could study at TUM and be able to work 20 hours a week doing something practical. That is number one we're looking for. So whatever university, this is an appel at everybody working elsewhere in a university, just allow the students to go out there and work practically on something. And I don't mean an internship at the university. I mean actually in the industry. Because that brings me to the second point, which is soft skills. I know it's very generic to say soft skills, but what I mean by soft skills is anything from communication. It tends to be very underestimated. Two people talking, especially techies, they like just to write in Slack. Hey, I wrote you in Slack yesterday. Didn't you get me? Of course, didn't get you. And we have a lot of problems that actually translate into loss of money that arise from this missing piece. Crisis management is another thing. Dealing with stress, dealing with deadlines, that kind of thing. All of those things come from not a seminar in soft skills. They come from the possibility to work in an industrial context as a young person. So that is a summary of my point. Practical experience both from the technical side, but that it also implies soft skills.
Yeah. I haven't heard Python or C++ for the time so far.
But that changes
after 60 minutes.
Changes.
It's
because
amazing.
that changes.
They
They could be very good Python developers. We're just having a conference right now at our office about the new programming languages, and we're actually forcing the guys who joined us 3-4 years ago to learn something new, and now they're presenting it, and they have to present something that's better than Python, right? They're having fights over there about Python versus non-Python. So programming languages change.
They do, and so that's a small anecdote. When I learned programming, I don't even mention what language it is. It's still in use, the language, but
Pascal,
only for a tiny niche of high-performance computing guys. The person teaching us the language said, "Yeah, you know what? You poor guys still have to sit in front of a terminal and type in a strange, exotic language. Your next generation, people coming after you, they'll just paint the algorithm, draw it on a piece of paper, it's going to be scanned, and some computer interpreter, if you will, takes care of it." It hasn't happened like that, although we're coming close to it with these graphical user interfaces, which kind of like back then I thought is most things are a means to an end in the end. What really matters is problem-solving ability. And if you can write that down in a sequence of actions to take to come from a problem statement and say input data and boundary conditions to a solution, that's really what matters. How that is implemented in bits and bytes, kind of like a secondary. We are not there yet, but I think it moves in the same direction. It would be a soft skill that matters, the ability to think a problem through much more than the ability to write a particularly efficient piece of code for a specific chip. But anyhow, before we maybe dive into that a little more, I want to tell the audience we are about 2/3 into our session here. Not all of you have access to the platform and to the chat function. Those of you who do, feel free to just throw in questions, remarks, or comments. I would see it here on my screen. I think my co-panelists will also see it, and we'll just pick it up and walk through that as it comes in. Let me get back to learning to learn and ask Jan again. It's true that we learn to learn at a university, but it's more a side effect, isn't it? Are we really taught to learn when we go through university, or do we have to learn it the hard way ourselves? How systematic is I would say, the teaching of problem solving in a university? Could it be done better, because that relates to a lot of what we said before? Or is it basically the way done by, hey, these are problems, there is a solution to them, walk through them, and if you find the right solution, you probably have cracked the code of how to solve them. Is that self-learning to learn? Is that enough, or should we be more systematic about it?
Well, it's a very big question, but I can respond to it in the following way, that I met with Spotify, maybe you know of that company, who's one of those that hire many of our students from KTH afterwards, and they wanted to meet me to provide some feedback on our students that they hired and what they thought they knew and what they thought they didn't know. And that turned out to be a really interesting mission, because in the past we've had a lot of interaction with industry, but it was typically these bigger, older industries like Ericsson or ABB or others that provided input. So now we could hear from a young company what they thought. And they said, well, you guys, you're educating excellent students. They're really extremely good. But one of the problems is that they know that they're good, and they communicate that and have a self-confidence when they come out of the university and enter into the labor market, that they know everything. So one of the first things we at the company need to do is we need to convince them that they don't know half of what they need to know. They need to continue to learn when they're out there in the industry. And it wouldn't hurt if we would teach them a bit more of modesty for this process of learning, and to realize that they needed to learn more things on that. The next thing they said was that your students are really good at solving artificial problems individually. And but that's not what the reality looks like. Having somebody that could crack a problem by coding a particular algorithm according to a predefined way of doing things is not who we want to employ, because we need somebody that jumps into a team with probably 1,000 other developers and need to collaborate and interact with them which requires quite a lot of the skills that Sid talked about as well, the ability to interact with people, and maybe actually also the ability to understand and be empathic about the users and to get their views into what they're doing. So you really need to learn more on how to collaborate and to solve big complex problems, because in industry, the problems you work with, you can't solve that by yourself, and you can't keep on competing with the other students. You need to collaborate. And so by sort of working more in a collaborative fashion with other students would help a bit. But even more interesting would be if you could work in a collaborative fashion with the industry already in your education. And as industry also has the need to get more lifelong learning, why not mix people from the industry that need to refuel their skills with the current students and get them to interact with each other? The students would learn a lot, the people from industry would of course learn a lot, and we as teachers at the university would also learn completely new things because of the things that the people from industry bring back to us. So I think that that's a very important thing to realize, that we haven't really designed an education to fit the needs out there, but we've designed an education where you should become individually competitive and be at the top of what you're doing, and not really foster great collaboration between others. Also, I would say that I think that you need much more to be better at multidisciplinary collaboration, because you will eventually end up, as a programmer, you will eventually end up out in the industry collaborating with nurses to develop a new system for healthcare, or with lawyers working at the tax authority with their systems. And so, but these kind of skills on how you actually are respectful to other people's expertise and how you can mix this in a good way is really a tough thing to work with, and that you should be able to learn already earlier on in the school. So why not sort of mix everything together and work much more in a project based way of learning things? I think that would be a much better benefit to it.
So maybe we are fortunate, if I may say so, fortunate or unfortunate, but I think no university in the world has, or no region that has university schools, kindergartens, and industry has cracked that code in a sense, right? So everybody is suffering from the same, well, let me call it inertia to an extent. And maybe that inertia has served us fairly well over many years, that we don't change things that don't need changing. But I mean, from everything I hear here tonight, there is a huge opportunity in preparing people better for what it takes in the digital future. But it needs everybody to coordinate, and that's always hard. If it was just a simple business case, people would figure it out how to go after it. But this one is more than that. It's actually a society almost acting in a coordinated fashion to make it work. But there's opportunities. We're going to see more of that. Let me jump sort of from what happens at the entry level, which we just discussed, to the, say, upper echelons of the typical corporate hierarchies or career ladders. Laura brought that up in the very beginning, saying like there's people that have gone through experiences in their professional life very different from those today, and they haven't had the exposure. So Laura, looking at the companies that you know, SKF, but I mean also other companies, I'm sure you have exchange with peers from many other companies. Was it that you think on a leadership level, senior leadership level, is missing today in terms of digital skills, which is exactly not about programming languages, but about strategic foresight and understanding, connecting the dots? What would you say, what is missing?
Let me say first what is there and then what is missing. What is there is curiosity, is if somebody does, maybe I should also do. But what is missing is the speed of decision. In few words is, let me say, the speed of decision, how to merge the past, let's say what you have inherited, and the future. So here I like to distinguish in a way what is inheritance and what is legacy. You know, for a company with long time knowledge and a strong presence in the market, the risk is that you, at a certain moment, you are, you know a lot, but you are also trapped by what you know. And funny enough, sometimes this resistance is not maybe on the very high level, is at the research center. Because in the research center are the ones who have done certain, let's say, develop a certain knowledge for years, and is the core knowledge. And suddenly the core knowledge is also put in doubt. Not that as knowledge as such, but how fast this knowledge becomes business. And by the way, maybe if we are a bit more digital in our thinking, this could be faster. So you may find the resistance where you don't expect. You may find the curiosity that is not yet becoming a decision. So this is, in my view, what is a bit lacking. Is the common decision and the, let's say, solving the resistance in a, I would say, constructive way. Maybe also using what I call contamination. Yeah, contamination within the company or with the outside. If that contamination is constructive and brings to the speed and the decision, I welcome that. And the contamination also the research center that used to be maybe, let's say, could be the big, let's say, the biggest one to change, to move to a change. There will be some fear. We spoke fear before. There will be some fear for the scientists doing tribology with their models since long, and then suddenly somebody's coming with analytics and tell you, oh no, your model, is lacking this and that and that, and skip this function and the other one. So this fear is not only in the workforce. This fear is also on the high intellectual,
Yeah, which is actually, I think I totally agree with you. I've been in industrial R&D for long enough. You would think that those people are the ones most open to new ideas. Whatever works best, I'm jumping after it. And it's not true. If your career is invested in a certain way of doing things, if your company know-how or your differentiation depends on design tools that only you have, but nobody else, and if those tools are potentially threatened or replaced by other approaches, that creates a ton of confusion and also resistance.
But if the executive in charge of R&D is on board with the full R&D, then the decision takes a different step, a different, I would say, endorsement as well. So you cannot leave the research behind. You have to have it on board. And so you have to have it, let's say, with the speed that is needed and with the, I would say, with the transformation, sorry, the word maybe is not appropriate, but also in the way they learn. This is again a way, the topic, learn to learn in a different way, and not, don't use your previous knowledge, your inheritance as a trap.
Very good. I have to move over to Hannah, who is teaching to executives of all ranks and all age brackets and experiences. From your experiences, again, you are biased. The people that come and take classes are the ones who want to learn, so you don't get to see those who have no interest in growing and expanding their base, but you are working with many companies too. What do you think is on the leadership level when it comes to digital skills? What is the thing most sorely missing, if I may say so?
Missing in terms of skills?
Yeah, sort of what skill, a skill could be an awareness, a skill could be a perspective, a skill could be a strategic capability rather than a technical capability that some people may not have, but they are in roles of great responsibility and they may not recognize that they don't have, I would say, the right perspective on things. Is there anything that for you stands out in your interactions with more senior people that are in management roles? You say like, I wish they were more aware of this or that. It would make it so much easier for them to be successful in their roles when it comes to digital and digital skills or transformation, or working in an industry that is undergoing change.
Right. And it's hard to pinpoint one thing where, you know, it would be unfair and easy perhaps to accuse big leaders or big companies of being blindsided by something or by jumping on trains by other things. So if anything, it's sort of dancing the dance of fine balance of trying to bridge the tomorrow and the past, which brings a little bit of what Laura was saying, right? In terms of preparing their organizations to do something and having the right sense of timing of when is the right time to jump the train on something, because we talked about it before, and Z had said, you know, it's not necessarily about having the first mover advantage and being the champion in pushing through and having others learn from your mistakes, but at the same time, you can't fall behind too much. And so timing becomes a big question, I would say, for many of the people that I've talked to.
Yeah, I would probably need to ask you to go out and ask to all of those who do not sign up for a class at a university, because they are too confident and that they know the way and that they are sort of like.
But you know what? I was just reflecting as you were talking about it in terms of learning to learn. I think it's fascinating to sort of peel the layers of our awareness and biases that we bring in. So even the people that walk into my classrooms, which, you know, profoundly say I'm, you know, burning for open-mindedness and innovation and future-looking, forward-looking mindsets, etc. But even when we ask them to define new projects and go and talk to actual users and relevant stakeholders in the ecosystem to verify some of these assumptions and verify some of these hypotheses, it literally takes us days to kick them out and just knock on doors or pick up phones and actually talk to people. It's amazing how fragile our egos are and how hard it is for us to ask a question and open ourselves to the possibility of being wrong. And I think this is part of that learning to learn, which is not just about, you know, how systematic do you use something, what is the right process around it, etc. It's about breaking the mindset and going back a bit to that child that I was mentioning earlier, which is, you know, I thought something was the way it should be. I put it out, it was wrong, it crashed and landed on its face. That's okay. So crossing that mindset and getting over yourself and all that learning that you did in the past. So learning to unlearn, if you want, is something that we're finding to be a very interesting, reflective experience in the classroom.
Yeah, learning to unlearn is an interesting one, Hannah. That I think it's a good one. I recall a kind of like a mental model that we had once worked with, where someone said the way you have to look at your strategic playing field, if you will, is you gotta, I mean, successes today, you gotta prepare for the future, but you gotta selectively forget the past. And everybody nods, and yes, exactly. It's almost impossible to do that. Right? Because not only you must forget that, everybody else around you too. Because if you are the only one who says like, that is past, that no longer matters, and everybody else thinks, no, these are important learnings, right? We got to stick to it. It's hard to break away from the crowd, especially when you are with a team in a company for a long time, right? As you have there to say, it's a social construct as much as it is a business. So yeah, I mean, it can't be that you don't run into that almost continuously, that you work with people on a technical level in your projects in these companies, but the larger corporations around it not always act or respond or well, yeah, let me say respond to what needs to happen probably in the right way. Too slow, decisions not being taken. Oh yeah, we'll maybe do it next year, and the person changes, and then the whole thing starts from beginning. Give us an idea of what, in your experience, senior leaders in particular in companies need to learn to be better prepared themselves to lead the transformation and the change and the new opportunities also in their companies that come with digital.
Let me first tell you, if there are any senior leaders listening to us, that the problems they have, they don't come necessarily with legacy, they all come with size. One of my good friends is head of the AI department at one of those very big Silicon Valley companies, and he recently left because he said the company is not innovative. He said basically what he said is what everybody else says in those companies we're talking about now. Yeah, we have a lot of ideas. We're very slow to adopt them. A startup will come and disrupt us. So the problems are everywhere. Those leadership problems. They're not only in old economy, they're also in new economy that grew too big. But the problems, in my perspective, are not necessarily management problems, they're leadership problems. For example, old economy companies are struggling to create environments and company cultures and a management style that's compatible with a Generation Y techie, for example. This is one of the major things. It requires a new leadership style. Even us, I mean, I'm 31 and I am struggling with the new employees we have to adapt my leadership style. So I think that is a major thing. That is a huge, huge thing, because you need people to do digitization or digital transformation or emerging tech. You need people to do so. And people tend to, from Generation Y or Generation Z, they're very selective about few work environment things. This is the way it is. They grew up in a time where the market, the employment market is very good for the employees, so they could choose from different companies, and they're very sensitive to it. And all economy companies tend to struggle with that aspect of it. So that is, in my opinion, the main thing. The other thing is a bit more technical, but it's finding a balance between make and buy decisions. You either get the chief digital officer or chief technical CTO who says we have to build everything ourselves, or you get the other person who says we don't need this, we'll buy everything, and they get stuck into a certain ecosystem. So finding the balance between make and buy, technologically speaking, funnily speaking, is also an issue for a lot of the companies. So these are the two things I could think about, mainly the cultural and management style perspective, like Common 9 and Leave at 5 and stuff like that. You cannot work remotely. They cannot really deal with the entitlement issues of my generation, that kind of thing. So I think that's a major thing. And I think we need people from academia like Hannah and Jan to give us some tools to deal with those problems.
All right, we're coming actually quite close to the end, and we have a very sharp deadline. We have to leave the room altogether in a couple of minutes. I want to give everybody an opportunity to leave our audience with a few recommendations, and think of the audience as a mix of people who are in their roles and like to get better, say permanent employment position, could be at a university or somewhere else, a research organization or a company. And then there's also some who probably are leaving their academic tenure. I mean, maybe they have been postdocs or doctoral students or master students moving into industry or some other employment opportunities, and are wondering, like, am I well prepared? How can I tell? What should I do? And I'll start with Laura, maybe, if you want to give a few words of wisdom to our audience as they may ponder the idea of going to industry and being trying to become better prepared, knowing what it will take. What are the things, the 2-3 things you would give as recommendations?
I would say curiosity, and curiosity for real cases, for practical experience. Be hungry of that. And then I would say work in a team with the non-digital ones. Help us to become mature quicker altogether.
Very good. Thank you, Jan. I mean, the people I'm talking about are around you all day long. I'm sure you're giving them good advice every day. Share that advice with everybody else here who joins us online. What are the things that people should pay attention to, do, attempt, focus on, to be well prepared for what's ahead and what's going on already around them?
To be well prepared for what's going on. Well, I think it is a lot of what we've been talking about today. Continue to learn, never stop learning, and also that you actually are triggered by the fun of it. So you can never stop having fun, because learning new things is really exciting. So maybe you should actually go to where your motivation brings you, not only sort of digging into your very narrow field of expertise, but sort of doing something very broad, because I think in the future we will have a lot of very peculiar multidisciplinary combinations of people that have studied completely different things. One of my daughters has done a mixture of social psychology and political science, which I think will be an excellent mix for the future. The two final things I wanted to bring up also is to build your personality, because your personality is one of your greatest assets in your work, and you need to nourish that through your cultural life and everything you do. And finally, value your values, because your basic values and how you work and have them trigger everything you do, I think is one of your greatest assets in your life.
Thank you. I move over to Hannah. Well, Hannah, your suggestions, recommendations to the people who wonder how can I be better prepared and what should I focus on to be ready for the challenges?
If you allow me just to be a bit of a devil's advocate, given that the chat is looking very empty, and congratulations to Simona Losmanova for actually saying hello. I think one thing we haven't really mentioned, we mentioned collaboration, importance of learning, etc. What we haven't mentioned is connecting to other people. So I would say all participants, and I don't know how many are online as we speak, continue the conversation and be a part of the conversation. So, you know, finding people that are relevant to learn from. And I think this panel is, I mean, between Ziad and Laura and Jan and Carlos, fantastic people to learn from about how the industry works, how innovation works, how R&D works, how governments think about things. If you connected with us here, it would be that much easier to follow up on LinkedIn and say, hey, I was the one who asked that question. Wouldn't you mind following up later? So finding a way to connect to people, finding a way to be remembered. Going back to Laura, finding a way to give something to others such that you can follow up with them later, and asking good questions at the right time would be some things that I would venture to say, because in conferences, virtual or otherwise, are incredible opportunities not only to learn passively, but to actively shape a conversation.
Thank you, Hannah. Ziad, it's your turn. What are your recommendations to our audience?
I think if you are in management, then business case is key for new technology. Everything else is research. Research is though very important. If you are in the employment market, practical experience is key. That's it.
Very good. Thank you. That was crisp. Excellent. So I'll wrap it up. I want to first and foremost thank all my co-panelists here for an engaged and very interesting discussion. As I said previously, and I can only repeat that, it took a very different direction than I had initially expected. The good old soft skills, things that make us function well in social contexts and work with others collaboratively on big things, still matter, and they matter more so than they ever did before. And I think that's something encouraging. The rest, you might say, are details. Learn a programming language if you want to, but don't think that that's going to buy you a career. Digital skills is way more than just technical capabilities. It's also about how to work well in an environment that is under continuous pressure of change. Thanks to the audience, whoever listened to us in Trieste or else, I certainly very much enjoyed it here. I hope my co-panelists had a good time as well. As you can tell from the background here, night is falling over Munich. And so it is, I think, in Sweden and probably also in Trieste and wherever everybody else is. All right, thank you very much again. Have a great evening and maybe reconnect sometime, either through LinkedIn, social media, use that invitation that Hannah just said, or maybe at the next ESOF conference, but then in person. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank you, Carlos. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.